happening. And yeah, we'll go over things. So as I said, first section is going to be regarding configuration of your FirePro system to display fields and to modify how the CAD import is working. We'll also talk about what happens during the actual process of the incident import, including things like matching up property records, creating assistance reports, how to search for records once they've been imported. And then at the very end, we'll talk a little bit about the process for identifying if you're missing incidents, the process for escalating if that is happening. So what I want to start off with today, it deals with the general FirePro configuration for an incident import. So when we are dealing, just get that closed. Switch to a different database here. So when we are dealing with importing incidents, the software is going to pull a wide range of pieces of information from the incident dispatch system and populate them into your FirePro program. There's a number of places that it puts information that are hidden in your FirePro by default because not everybody has this feature. So what I want to start off with is just going through identifying those hidden areas, making sure that they're turned on, and talking about how those work. So the first thing that we want to consider is in the Incidents tab of your custom settings, and this is accessible through the Setup menu in the option called Custom Settings. There's an Incidents tab. The system takes dispatch information as far as the dispatch response type and puts it into a field on your incidents called the called in as response type list. And we're going to see that in an actual incident in a second, but this is intended to allow you to see both the what you were paged out for and also what the actual call result ended up being, because there can be a difference between those two. So making sure that the show called in as response type is quite useful. And again, if you want to make sure that that's on, we can certainly help you to do that. So that is often one of the first steps we want to do. The second thing that we want to do is in the custom fields section, there is a field in here called FireCom tab title. By default, the FireCom tab in the remarks section, and again, we'll look at that in a moment, the FireCom tab is where we put your standard notes and timestamps from the dispatch import. So it's basically where anything that was entered by the dispatcher will show up. So we want to make sure that that tab has a title so that you can see it. If you don't see it, don't panic, because we're still putting the information there, and all you have to do is turn the title on, and we would then see the tab specifically. So Fire Dispatch tab needs to get turned on. That's quite useful from the context of the CAD. It's also a good idea, if we look at the other tab under Custom Settings, to make sure that you have one of the GPS fields turned on. Decimal degrees is usually the default, but again, that can be something you discuss with us about it. Generally speaking, the dispatch imports will pass lat-long coordinates for the call over to you, so it's nice to have those visible. FirePro will still use them even if they're not visible, but if you turn on the GPS fields, then you will at least be able to see them for the purpose of troubleshooting or review. So those are kind of some of the main things that you want to make sure are configured in your system to make sure that you're seeing most of the information that's being pulled in from dispatch. Another thing that you're going to want to do is in some systems, under the Incidents tab in CAD, there's a button called Mapped Time Fields. So Mapped Time Fields is used when we have standardized times that's pulled across from the dispatch that we can configure, as opposed to times which are hard-coded into the system. So the mapped time fields button is going to actually allow you to pick specific fields from the dispatch import records and decide where you want them to go in Fire. Now, pretty much all the time with these systems, there is a set defaults option, which resets things to the standard default, but those can be modified as necessary. Please do this with us in there, but that is something that you might need to get configured for. We can also set things like creating assistance reports as part of the CAD import, but I'll talk about that when I'm talking about the practicalities of the CAD import in a second. So the other thing that you need to check on your FirePro system when you're using or setting up a CAD import is in the inventory module. If you look at your individual apparatus records, these are what populates your truck chart in your incidents, your driving logs, things like that. And these need to have a field populated on them called CAD unit name, which is in the lower right-hand corner of the screen here. So the CAD unit name field is where you put in the information that dispatch has provided you as far as what they call your individual apparatuses, because in this case, obviously, QBL 58 is what dispatch calls Qualicum Beach's ladder 58 truck. So you want to make sure that that information is filled out, because many times when we're doing a CAD import, we rely on this unit name information to figure out stuff about the incident, like which apparatuses and which station were on scene first. Should we create assistance reports for this call? There's a lot that can come in there. So those CAD unit names are quite important. And I will show you on an incident how to diagnose if the CAD unit names are maybe not entered correctly or are not consistent with what we're seeing from the dispatch side of things. So making sure the CAD unit names are set up. If you're in doubt, you can contact us, contact dispatch, and get those CAD unit names so that we can ensure that they're set up correctly as part of your import process. Also, if you're dealing with changing an apparatus name, if dispatch is changing your apparatus labels, this is a place where that needs to get maintained as that process continues. So pretty important piece here, because in many dispatch imports, the apparatuses that are on scene are the only information that FirePro has that's going to determine what stations were on scene, for example. In many cases, dispatch does not expressly tell us exactly what incident or what stations are on scene. So that can be very useful. Now, when you are ready to actually run an import, in the system, there are two different ways that you can run the dispatch import. The first way is in the incident report module. There is a red toolbox up at the top, and there's an option called import incidents from CAD. So what that's going to do is manually check to see if there's any new incidents on the dispatch side and automatically import them into FirePro. So that is a tool that you can use anytime you want to, and it will just automatically check for new calls. In some cases, departments would rather not do that checking process manually. So if you want to automate the import process, you can go to the setup menu under custom settings, and in the incidents section under CAD, there's a tick box called Run Import when list window opens. So that little tick box basically sets FirePro to automatically check for incidents, new incident imports when you go into the incident module. More or less just completely automates the process. You can still use the manual pull if you want to do that, but this will speed up that process and make sure that any new incident, as soon as it arrives, will be imported automatically. Now, when FirePro imports an incident from the dispatch system, say, what the software does is it's going to look at, that's my development system, it's going to look at the address that dispatch provides, the address information. Let's actually make this a little bigger so that it's easier to see. So it's going to look at the address information that dispatch provides, and it's going to try to match that address information with a property record in your system. So it's going to look through your properties module and say, hey, is there a matching address based on the address information that I have here? You can tell immediately whether that's been successful by looking in the top right-hand corner of an incident. And if the import is not successful, get that thing cleared out, there's actually a button on here which is called Find Property. It appears dynamically if the incident is not matched, and you'll see it right away. The other thing that this system does when it's not able to match an address is it takes those incidents and puts them in what's called the unlinked incident list. So if you want to see your unlinked incident list, you can go to the red toolbox at the top here and select the option called Open Unlinked Incidents List. So this is actually going to give you a list of every incident in your system which is not currently mapped to a property. It is kind of an individual department decision about how much you care about that specific problem, because from the perspective of provincial reporting, statistical reporting, payroll calculation, and a lot of other kind of statistical reports, it doesn't really make a huge difference if the incident is attached to a property or not. The main reason that you might want to make sure that incidents are consistently attached to properties is if you have multiple different response areas that you want to keep carefully separate so that you can run reports on them. Like if you have an agreement with a neighboring municipality where you're doing responses in that municipality and then you need to track that and generate reports on it, it's a good idea to make sure that the incidents are attached to the right property. You could also do this. Some departments like to monitor how many false alarm calls they've had on specific addresses and run reports on that. So making sure that incidents are attached to properties is helpful in that context as well. So if I double click on one of these incidents here, I can see what this Find Property button looks like. It appears right away, and you can then use it to find the property record that you want to attach this incident to. In this case, we're dealing with a call that happened at an intersection, so you would probably be attaching this incident to what we would call a non-property record. As soon as you hit the Find Property button here, it's actually going to bring you into the standard property search. You can look for, in this case, a specific non-property record, and then just hit the Attach to Incident button. That will then automatically take that incident report, and it is now, the button is gone, it is now attached to a property. And if you want to see what property it's attached to, you can go up to the little red toolbox and select Show Property, and that will bring up the property record that the incident is now attached to. You can also use that Find Property function right from the Unlinked Incidents window. So I can hit Find Property, look for 650. Judges row here, it looks like. So in that case, I might add a new property record to attach it to if I wanted to do that. But the idea is that you can use this unlinked incident list to quickly monitor any incident that's not attached to a property record. So we try to do that as part of the standard import. Then what the system is going to do with the import is it's going to populate things like your called in as list. You don't have to worry about adding dispatch response types to this called in list. The software will automatically populate it for you based on the information that we get from dispatch. So it'll just populate that info. We can see here we've got a lat long coordinate populated. So that's going to show the coordinates. If you want to check the coordinates, you can hit this Google Maps button in the lower right-hand corner, and the system will give you a Google Maps search for the lat long coordinates that are on the attached incident. So that can be a quick way of just checking how accurate our information is. We're also going to get fire dispatch information populated as well as a dispatch reference number. So that's going to be the dispatch call number that they've provided. So if you want to search for incidents based on the dispatch call number, there's an option, and I'll just again open this in, open large is good. In the incident search window, under the details tab, there's the ability to search for specific dispatch numbers. So if you know the dispatch number, but you're not seeing it in FirePro, or it's several years old, you can just enter the dispatch reference number and that will find the incident. It is also possible on the list window to add some data columns like dispatch information. Often that's going to be things like, I will often use things like called in as response type, for example, or dispatch reference number. So you can display information about the dispatch side of things in the lists if you want to use those for reference for different types of calls. So the system is going to populate, as I said, date of call. It will, generally speaking, sequentially add the incidents to your incident numbering. You can always change this incident number that the system assigns if you want to. Can be manually adjusted as necessary. And it's then going to pull in things like dispatch lat long coordinates. It's also going to populate a variety of times for the incident, and depending on your system configuration, it will populate a number of different timestamps for you, seeing how long different phases of the call took. The overall time section is intended to represent the broad range of the incident as opposed to specific apparatuses at a call. But in many cases, we have to use apparatus times to flesh out those overall incidents. Now, one thing that I think is actually important to talk about is there is a field called time on scene, which FirePro uses pretty generally in a lot of different calculations. And in the context of dispatch imports, it's a really good idea when you are setting up your inventory apparatuses to pay attention to the fact that there's this little tick box here called does not trigger on scene time. So usually when we're looking at standard calculations for response time, we don't want to factor in command vehicles, personal vehicles, firefighters arriving in personal vehicles when we're thinking about what was the department's on-scene time. So what we can do with this tick box is basically eliminate certain apparatuses from setting the specific tools. Ryan, I would be happy to look into that specifically with you. Sometimes the CAD notes and the specific mapped fields are not necessarily exactly the same because the dispatcher might be putting in the CAD notes manually. But yeah, we'd certainly take a look at that and just do it together at some point. So yeah, so the setting the does not trigger on scene time will basically eliminate certain apparatuses from setting the on scene time when you're pulling stuff into the system. It is also a thing to consider when we're looking at the CAD import regarding whether or not you want the CAD import to actually populate incident end time for you. In many cases, you are going to get a end of call timestamp from dispatch, but from the context of things like tracking firefighter time for pay sheets, tracking actual incident duration, getting more accurate statistics about how long you were actually involved in each call, many departments like to actually put in their own incident end times rather than relying on the dispatch incident end times. Because if everybody stayed for an extra 45 minutes after the call was done to do post-call cleanup or additional work, then you might want to be either changing that manually or we can help you configure it so that FirePro does not automatically populate that timestamp so that it's a thing that you are reviewing and entering yourself. The system is also going to populate your various different apparatuses on here. And let's just see if I can find one. So what sometimes happens is if you look at this truck chart tab, you can see there's a unit label up in the list. And when I click on that unit, the information about that specific unit appears down at the bottom. There are sometimes times where if the system imports an apparatus log that doesn't have a match in your system, there's no CAD unit name that matches up with it, what you'll see here is that the unit name will appear here, but this unit name section at the bottom is blank, which indicates that we pulled it in for you, it's useful, but we couldn't find a match. So that can sometimes affect things like assistance report creation, potentially timestamps on the overall incident. So if we're seeing that on a regular basis, we want to try to make sure that we deal with that. There are definitely going to be times where, depending on the dispatch system, you will see apparatus records which do not actually represent apparatuses. They are often things like the dispatch system is logging stations as if they were an apparatus, or they're logging something like firefighter personal vehicles arriving as if they were apparatus. So you do see those sometimes, and they're totally fine to leave in for reference purposes. But if you've got primary apparatuses coming in where the unit information is blank down here, that's something that we want to address, and you should get in touch with us so we can review it. So the system will also pull in the Notes tab, the fire dispatch field. This is that field called FireCom Notes that I was talking about labeling before, and we can see that there's a variety of dispatch timestamps. These sometimes are system generated on the dispatch side, and in some cases also are manually created timestamps that the dispatcher has built, or has added to the call. So you'll often see a range of those in here. There is also automatically a field called dispatch times. Most dispatch systems will use this to log what we would consider hard-coded or standard timestamp fields from the dispatch record. And these are, again, going to be fairly consistent with what you're seeing on the run sheet from dispatch. And because there's a range of different dispatch systems with different terminology, your individual ones are going to be somewhat similar, or they can be different. The caller tab will also show in dispatch systems where we are provided with caller information, some basic information about the call. So that tends to be the stuff that we are importing as part of that initial pull. The system is also designed so that for more complicated calls where there's multiple stations on scene, that it is supposed to be trying to identify what the primary station is and creating assistance reports for you automatically. Now, that assistance report behavior is something that you can turn off if you want to. And for single station departments, obviously, it's not an issue. But there's various different calculations for picking assistance reports or creating them, which is based on the different dispatch softwares that we're processing. If we have specific questions about how yours is working, again, that's something we want to set up an actual appointment for, so we can work remotely and work through things to try to troubleshoot. But the process is generally going to be related to what apparatuses were at this call and which ones arrived first on scene, stuff like that. So it is also often useful when I'm working on the overall list, when I'm working in a specific incident. It can be quite useful to look at the author status tab. The author status tab is going to show you when this report was created, and any report that's created by the dispatch import will show as having been created by the CAD transfer. So it'll show when it was created and the CAD transfer time. Now, in the event that you have an incident and the file does not appear the next time you run the import, the process for that is normally to start by contacting dispatch and asking them to resend the incident, or to make sure that the incident is transferred. If they confirm that they have done that and it still doesn't show up in FirePro, then you want to escalate that to us. Then we will check the various stages of the import process to see exactly where that is happening. Likewise, if you go a day or two and you don't see imports or dispatch imports coming in, if you're being actively dispatched, then it's usually a good idea to contact us before that goes on for too long. First of all, so we don't allow a system to happen for a long period of time, and also to make sure that you don't have a backlog to deal with. There are a couple things you also want to think about here. One is that for most dispatch imports, FirePro will check when it imports an incident, it'll check the dispatch response number. And if the response number already exists in the program, it will not re-import most of the time. We try to have duplication checking there. There are some of the legacy imports that's not present for, but we're trying to make sure that that's the case all the time. So we do try to minimize duplication, but if you do see duplicate incidents, checking the dispatch reference number can be a good idea, because if they have different dispatch reference numbers, then it might mean that they've been transferred twice accidentally by dispatch, or dispatch logged them a couple times for whatever reason. Broadly speaking, we can always pull up those incident files for you and allow you to re-import them. So if you need to delete specific incidents, that's no problem whatsoever to do. It won't cause any problems. If it was pulled into your system accidentally, for example. There is also a really helpful tool that's built into this incident list window, which is not immediately obvious, that you can use, and that's the search called most recent incidents. So the most recent incident search option is always going to prioritize looking for incidents that have recently been imported. And that can include incidents that are further in the past, but have just been imported now. So if I do something like check my 10 most recent incidents, it's going to show me these incidents based on when they were pulled into the system. So if you have an import, for example, where you've run an import and you don't see the incident right away, you can always just do a quick most recent incident search and see if there's some kind of problem with the date format that might show up there. It allows you to quickly look for any new incidents that have just been pulled in. Likewise, you can use some more of the date times functions and combine them with things like searching for things like created date. So if you were suspicious that an incident didn't show up for some reason, but it showed that there was an import, you can add a created date column to your incident list window and sort by created date, which would bring incidents, even if they had been created in an earlier time frame, directly into the system. This department has a lot of incidents, so it's taking a second. So, I can always add created date and then resort by created date to see incidents based on exactly when each incident was created, regardless of whether that is chronologically the same as the incident itself. That's kind of the main processes and things about the dispatch import that I wanted to talk about and review today. Do people have, like, Ryan, I'll just drop me an email and we'll do a more detailed pull through, but does anybody have any more general questions about the CAD import fields?